Dhamma Chaloka Dipadi Sahampati Katanjali Anadi Warang Ayachata Santida Sata Parajagajatika Dese tu Dhammang Anukam Pimang Pajang.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. Here we are for our monthly gathering here in Portland Friends of Dhamma. We're coming from our Hermitage once a month to join everybody here in the practice of meditation and Dhamma. Express gratitude for the wisdom of the organizers to have it down here tonight. Whereas I haven't been upstairs, but I imagine it's at least 15 degrees hotter up there. It's actually not uncomfortable at all now. I thought I'd maybe just talk a bit tonight about a theme that Ajahn Sudanto introduced last Tuesday night at our regular weekly gathering in White Salmon. Just out the gorge, for those of you who know that. Our Hermitage is about an hour and 20 minutes east of here in the gorge, and we gather on Tuesday nights at the local yoga studio to have an evening of pretty much like this. And he was talking Tuesday evening about the fact that this path that we've embarked on, spiritual path of practicing the Buddhist teachings, is one that is a path of practice, one that isn't something that is like an innate ability or a natural process, that it takes a certain amount of determination, I think is a good word to use. The Pali word adhiṭṭhāna is one of the 10, what they call it, the 10 parami, or spiritual perfections, spiritual trainings. It's one that's not often talked a whole lot about when people are talking about the paramis. But he introduced it as a topic stimulated by a book he was reading called Grit, which I haven't read yet, but goes into some of those themes of essentially how to develop one's skills to the best of one's ability in a certain area, and that a lot of it is just part of a long-term commitment of practice and repetition. That for most of us, perhaps unless we bring into this life some accumulated wisdom from past lives, but for most of us, even with that, it's a long-term commitment, a long-term determination. It's not something that happens very quickly, for the most part. A skill that we have to develop and constantly refine. So this term adhiṭṭhāna, often translated as determination or resolve, is something to reflect on, keep in mind. One of the dangers that we encounter, one of the obstructions that we encounter in spiritual practice, is one that pretty much hits most of us, I think, who have taken up the practice with a certain amount of sincerity and commitment, and are trying to look at the long haul, the long-term practice. That oftentimes in the beginning there's a real initial inspiration and energy, because the teachings are something we haven't heard of and offer a tremendous amount of hope for the dilemmas that we find ourselves in. And there's oftentimes in the early days and months and years of picking up the practice, there can be sometimes some quite profound insights and what we would maybe term rapid growth in our spiritual practice. Oftentimes because our minds are starting from such a complicated and coarse kind of a place that anything we do to help settle down and purify the heart and purify our bad habits, even a little bit, feels like a lot, because it is relative to where we started from. And then as time goes on, we reinforce those and practice all of the aspects of the Eightfold Path. There can be a certain development of a kind of a plateau where it doesn't feel like that there's maybe so much sudden or stimulating or noticeable kind of growth in the practice. Yet we still feel comfortable, nourished, and sustained by what we've come to understand and the way we have adjusted our lives. The danger is becoming a bit complacent. We've gotten rid of some of the kind of the more coarse habits in our mind that have caused us lots of trouble, whether it's coarse aspects of greed or rampant craving, kinds of things that we've been able to kind of help put a damper on, or aspects of anger or aversion that we've been able to help check a bit through some of the practices. And we experience the benefits of those to the extent that it feels quite comfortable and natural, and we feel much more at ease. Our stress levels have come down. We've maybe adjusted our lifestyles a bit to experience a slightly, even moderately higher level of sanity in our lives. And it's easy to coast with that sometimes. And particularly as Buddhist practice has come to the West, there's been a very, very strong emphasis on using it for developing a greater, less stressful, greater ease in daily life. And certainly that is an incredibly important aspect of it, and one that motivates us and keeps us going as well. This stress reduction aspect of the practice. But it's also good to keep in mind that the Buddha taught a path that can take us further than that, and can take us really, if we have this long-term sense of commitment and not letting ourselves be complacent, it can take us to a very, very profound, complete liberation of the heart. Beyond, psychological comfort or less stressed life. So it really behooves us to keep that potential in mind as a motivating force, not to get lost in good enough complacency. That good enough kind of attitude is sometimes quite useful if we are caught in over-striving or have too high expectations of where we should be at any one point in time, get caught in kind of a self-judgmental striving. Sometimes we have to kind of let up on the gas pedal a little bit if we're overstretching. But the hazard, or the opposite potential of complacency, is one to watch out for too as we go along in the practice. So it's always good to be involved with evaluation, reevaluation of where you're at on the path with the various aspects of the training. And be willing to sometimes take some risks and to move beyond the level of comfort, the comfort zone that we've kind of created for each other, to really examine and see, have I taken this as far as I can? Is there more, particularly in accordance with the teachings and the potential end result? Is there more that I can be doing? Again, not in a judgmental, overly striving kind of a way, but in a very clear, conscious honesty. There's different ways and many different paths that people take in their life, and I can think of just my own trajectory, and that I practiced for 8-10 years as a lay practitioner before I became a monk, and over some years of practice and realizing some of the benefits from the practice and the teaching, and drawing closer to the teachers from the monastic tradition, like initially Ajahn Amaro, Ajahn Sumedho, a little bit later on Ajahn Pasano, and some of the very inspiring teachers, Western teachers of Ajahn, Western disciples of Ajahn Chah. My faith really started to grow in the practice and in the tradition, and it grew to such an extent that I started not to feel comfortable just continuing. Although I was feeling quite content with many aspects of my life and my practice, and had a very skillful householder life, had let go of a lot of the more unskillful habits that I had kind of grown up within my life, early adult life, and feeling quite comfortable. I was still feeling like, well, is this as far as I can take it? I had a very strong sense of commitment to relationship and family and the work that I did, and felt, well, I really aspire in some ways internally to this monastic life, but it's not possible in this lifetime. It just can't happen. I was in my 30s as these thoughts were going along. But I made a very clear determination in my head. Okay, well, maybe not this lifetime. In fact, very likely not this lifetime. But I'm going to keep practicing as best I can in the ways that I know how. Keep growing, not getting complacent, and live my life as skillfully as I can. Honor my commitments, and maybe if I'm lucky and diligent, then in the next lifetime I'll have the opportunity to ordain. So I didn't beat myself up for not being able to do it and didn't feel like it was a bad thing, but also had a very clear aspiration and set that adhiṭṭhāna, set that determination, as a very clear and conscious determination for the next lifetime. But to do everything I possibly can in this lifetime to support that aspiration. And lo and behold, a number of years later, I think the force of that determination and the changing circumstances of my life, the window of opportunity opened. And I was able to, at least fulfill that aspiration at around the age of 40 to go forth. There was still a lot of wavering and doubt and unsureness, but I think the aspect of turning 40 kind of needed some sort of midlife crisis. And so this opportunity came up, and I thought, well, if I don't do it now, I do have this opportunity. I don't have to wait till the next lifetime. If I don't do it now, it's really probably not going to happen this lifetime. So just do it, And there's that certain amount of unsure risk-taking where sometimes you just have to jump in. So I'm not saying that that's a path that anybody else here should consider if that's not appropriate for you. But just to recognize the strength of a clear determination and a clear inspiration with what this path can bring and what it can do to transform the mind, and to, in whatever form works for you, to really take that long-term view, take that long-term commitment. Even as a monk, I don't have, crazy expectations of how short or how long it's going to take to complete this path, but still trying to maintain this long-term perspective, even if it takes another 1,000 lifetimes. This is clearly how I want to spend my lives, because there's really no other choice in my mind. But we can take this aspect of non-complacency and review and evaluation through the whole path. The Buddha taught a gradual training, a gradual path that starts from some fundamental trainings of our behavior and our speech, all the way through many different angles of the Eightfold Path and permutations and variations on it, up through the practices of meditation, mindfulness, right effort, the development of more peaceful, deep, still states of mind, and the discerning insight that comes through reflection on where the path can actually take us. And we practice all of these aspects of the path as we go along. We don't have to do it in a sequence where we perfect our virtue before we do any kind of mind training. We pick up many different aspects of the path at once. So we have to keep reviewing each of those aspects of the gradual path to see, have we become complacent somewhere? Have we become satisfied but not quite so discerning? So it's useful to start and reflect through the aspects of the gradual training, I think. Sila, many of you have come through the Upasaka training program here, and I think there's a fairly strong emphasis on the development of Sila, or the virtuous conduct, through the development of precepts. And I'm not sure of the actual all the details that Sakula gets into with this part of the training. But most of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the 5 precepts. And it's good to review them and see, well, how far have I really delved into them and made them part of my life? You know, the monastics, we have a set of 227 basic precepts, and many of them are just expanding on the 5 precepts themselves in more detail, more refined levels of description and detail, as well as renunciate precepts that we take on. So really it's more of an elaboration on the 8 or the 10 precepts of a long-term, monastically inclined person. And it's good to review, and sometimes it's good to see how many of those kinds of monastic standards actually can fit into a lay practice that go above and beyond just the letter of the precept themselves. And I think there's many instances, particularly among the moral precepts, where these refinements are very useful to look at and can make a difference in how you practice with them. The first precept of not taking the life of any living creature is often, pretty straightforward to people. It's sometimes a challenge, particularly in the animal realm. I think that probably most of us here are comfortable with the idea of not taking human life. And we should remember that and congratulate ourselves for not engaging in killing other human beings. There's a lot of people in the world who can't say that. See that in the wars and the violence in the world around us, that there's actually quite a few people who don't honor that very core aspect of not taking human life, with all sorts of justifications. But beyond that, how well do we take this to its ultimate refinement? I know that it can be very difficult sometimes, and I used to be a gardener myself, and had lots of good reasons why, there are certain insects that were considered to be hazardous and pests and detrimental, and I was able to rationalize to myself why it was okay to put out the slug bait, or well, I'm not actually killing them myself. They're voluntarily eating the poison. I'm just putting it there, But then when, and this was even after I had taken on precepts, I still had this dilemma of the garden and the insects and the aphids and slugs. Those are the biggies. What to do, because they were clearly going after my vegetables and flowers too. But then I decided, this is a really clear precept that the Buddha taught. The monastic, practice is very clear about not even harming, taking the life of any sentient creature, as big as the eye can see. Any animal, any member of the animal realm that has sentient existence. So, what can I do to refine this in my own life? And I made a resolution to just do whatever I had to do, but not to intentionally take the life of even the slugs and the aphids. And it was a real chore, and eventually I ended up not growing vegetables anymore. Because that was particularly difficult to control. But then with the flowers and the garden, I was able to find that with it took more effort. It took a good 45 minutes every morning to go out there and hunt slugs, pick them up, put them in a box, put them in another part of the yard where they wouldn't hurt the flowers when you eat something else. And the aphids that were on the rose bushes, I was never able to get rid of all of them, but I was able to knock off enough of them so that the plant could survive and that the roses could still bloom. Every now and then, one of them would croak under the influence, but and it took more diligence and it took more effort. But I have to say, in the end, my mind was a lot more peaceful. So there are ways that, along those lines, that we can refine our practice if we've gotten complacent and have been able to justify. The internal lawyer, as Ajahn Karunadhammo used to call it, the internal lawyer is very persuasive about offering justifications in our lives that pull us into complacency. So making a determination, follow this one to the letter and see where it can take you. The second precept of not telling any lies. No, that's not the second one. Not stealing is the second precept. Not taking anything that is not given. A very important one. And I think that, many of us see the clarity of that in its basic form. I don't think there are probably too many here who would, intentionally burglarize a house or go up with our, gun, ask the teller at the bank to hand over all the money, that kind of a thing. So that's a pretty basic structure. Again, some places in the world that still happens quite a bit. But ask yourself, what about some of the other things that are a bit more on the subtle side? Have I grown complacent about what I report on my taxes? Or, everybody else at the office takes pencils and pens home from the office supply, so it's really expected, That's not a big deal. That's something that everybody does. Coming back from a foreign country and, this isn't really something that I need to declare through customs. This doesn't really count. It's a gift that somebody gave me, et cetera, so that doesn't need to... There's kinds of little shaded aspects, the more subtle aspects of what might fall under that precept. Where am I with that? You can ask yourself that question. Is my internal lawyer justifying those things for me in my mind? These precepts, again, just as I go through them, aren't meant to be like a punitive stick being held over your head that you're going to be, measured against or judged harshly in a punitive way. They're trainings that we undertake, and we undertake them consciously to see the effects that they have on our mind. And to see how really taking things to a much more deeper level, more detailed level, actually does make a difference in the quality of our mind. The third precept of not taking advantage sexually of others, not engaging in sexual misconduct in its basic root form would be to, if one's in a long-term committed relationship, to honor that and not move out of the bounds of that relationship with sexuality, or to not, even if you're not involved in a relationship, to not get involved with other people who are involved in a committed relationship, not to cross that barrier. Those are sort of the basic levels, not to take advantage, not to use sexuality in a harmful way. So that's kind of I think the core understanding for most people, to be responsible in the sexual realm. But there's other refinements too that come along that can help create a more stable sense of mind, particularly if there's a fair amount of sexual desire present, which is often the case. And let's say, the subtle aspects of maybe you are in a committed relationship, seeing somebody who's attractive. What happens in the mind? What happens with your behavior? Is there a subtle flirting that happens, even though you're not going to go beyond the bounds of your committed relationship? It's easy to maybe fall into that kind of flirty kind of engagement with somebody who's particularly compelling. What does that feel like? Take that in. There's the initial excitement and interest and kind of a little bit of a charge that comes from that. But in relation to a calm, equanimous, peaceful, settled state of mind, what does that actually do to it? Is it worth it? Or maybe if it's not out and out flirtatiousness, you just kind of get into that goofy mode, getting goofy around somebody just because you don't know what to say, get all mushy and puddly. What does that feel like in compared to what a peaceful, balanced mind can feel like? So the power of these feelings, the power of these kinds of actions, really examine them beyond the basic level of the principle of the precept. Particularly the one around right speech. The most essential form of right speech is not telling lies. And that can be, also taken to a more refined level sometimes in how we look at it. I remember after I ordained, and we had a lot of rules around speech that go beyond just the basic aspects of not lying. Many rules, because there's a lot of subtle ways that we can cause harm to others and to ourselves through speech. But I remember noticing that a particular habit of mine, kind of a twofold habit of mine with speech, particularly around the not lying aspect of it. I was pretty good about not telling conscious lies. I was able to kind of get that and work with it. But if there was a challenging situation, or somebody was maybe blaming me for something, even if rightfully so, I could feel this defensiveness arise and kind of an avoidance in speech, not an out-and-out conscious lie, but this kind of sidestepping or not really answering the question or not really owning up to something in a clear, no, you're right, I did that, I said that, or I promised that. But an avoidance kind of a mode. And then the other aspect was a tendency to exaggerate. It wasn't exactly conscious deception, but there was an exaggeration, like I've told you 500 times that blah, blah, blah. Well, it really wasn't 500 times. Maybe 5, or maybe 2. So just noticing that those kind of defensive and exaggerating tendencies in my speech come obviously from an insecure place. And so I made a determination to really notice that and practice with that. And to the point where we have, every 2 weeks as monks, we have to confess our offenses to another monk before we chant the rules of recitation. That's part of our every 2 week ritual. And even though mine weren't strictly offenses and I wouldn't have had to confess them, I thought, I'm going to just say this to this other person, just as a way of putting it out there. And maybe that, the embarrassment that I feel about having to confess exaggerating or confess defensiveness, for the umpteenth time, or maybe just the 5th time. Maybe that embarrassment would help control the offense. And you can see, to some extent, it has worked. Maybe not completely yet. But, yeah, making it conscious and making the determination to work on these subtle aspects of speech, truth-telling, other aspects of speech that we can easily get caught into, harsh speech, learning how to restrain angry speech is sometimes just very, very difficult, because it lets off so much energy, and uncomfortable energy when we kind of blurt out what it is that's bothering us. It's an uncomfortable feeling to feel irritation or anger or annoyance, that kind of a thing. And most often the way that we dispel that energy is through harsh speech. So that can be a real challenge that many of us work with for a very long period of time. But it's interesting to see that even if one does develop a certain level of skill in that area, that too can fall into complacency. I think if you're living with people over a long period of time, whether they're spouses or partners or other family members in a family orientation, or certainly in a monastery, or just with your friends or co-workers, you become certainly familiar with people, and maybe the habits become a little bit looser. Like when you first meet somebody, how careful you can be when you're alert and mindful with your speech, because you don't know another person, you don't know about them or how they would respond to you. So, you don't go to a party and meet somebody who seems kind of nice and start immediately, ripping them off, with ripping out angry speech. You're very careful and measured, and you're thoughtful about how you say what you say, if you're not caught in goofiness. But over time, it's easy to let a sense of complacency. Oh, well, you're more familiar with this person, and there's always going to be something they say that's irritating, or some behavior that's annoying, or whatever, and how it can sometimes become easy to just kind of assume a certain level of such familiarity, because you do have a level of friendship and familiarity and comfort, that you're not as careful with your speech. That more is just kind of slips out because you don't have that kind of sense of conscience, concern, kind of heedfulness around the speech because of the familiarity. So that's the way that complacency can come into speech too, and to make a determination. I'm going to really work with this aspect of my speech if you find that it's a challenge or it's a problem sometimes, and really maybe practice having the same patterns of speech with people that I'm familiar with that I would somebody that I don't know. That level of circumspection and care. Another way of refining our determination to grow on the path and not get complacent. Fifth precept of alcohol. That's a tough one for some people. It's not considered to be a moral precept in and of itself, like the first four are. That if you break the first four precepts, there's pretty inherent sense of harmfulness, whether it's very minor or very major, that comes from those. Fifth precept against use of intoxicants isn't quite it's not really such a strong moral precept, but as everybody knows, not following it can lead to breaking the first four precepts more easily through heedlessness from an uncontrolled mind, or sloppy mind, or tired mind, intoxicated mind. But, just ask yourself, well, if I'm still drinking a glass of wine or having a beer every now and then, it's no harm necessarily done. It's not a moral issue. But the Buddha did make that a pretty strong and clear precept. No intoxicants. And the letter of the laws really means no. It doesn't mean except for these certain occasions or whatever. And I remember having a struggle with that one myself, even after I was following the first four precepts pretty closely. Social pressures can be quite strong in a group. And it was hard to justify sometimes my not wanting to join in. But then I thought, the Buddha made this a precept, and look at it. What is it? What is it that's going on in your mind? And a lot of it was just not wanting to look, like a killjoy, or not wanting to look like I'm holier than thou, or that kind of a reputation thing. Because I didn't actually really enjoy it all that much. I found that it kind of made me a bit dull, even if not, drunk. It would just kind of dull my mind. And the more I got into meditation, the more even a beer or a glass of wine, I could see the effect that it had on it. I wasn't able to stay with clarity with my meditation. So finally I made that determination. I'm just not going to refine this one. I'm not going to get complacent with this one. I'm just going to do it and not try and apologize for it, not try to make excuses, not try and be holier than thou. It's because it's just the way I want to do it. And there's many aspects of practice that, along the lines of precepts, that we can look at in a more refined way once we really delve into them as a way of not being complacent, upping the ante a bit. The Buddha's gradual path then starts to include more of the aspects of training our behavior in a more refined way too. And one of the teachings that is offered is what's called the Apanaka Dhammas. Apanaka meaning, I think a good translation I like is always a good bet. Things that are essentially useful and good to keep in mind in any and all situations, whether monastic or lay. But if we're sincere about developing our spiritual path and meditation practice in particular, these three teachings that are practices, trainings that are always a good bet are useful to keep in mind. One of them is moderation in eating. And, how much energy and time and interest do we spend around food, and the amount of commitment to enjoyment that takes. And it's not that we should go out of our way to make it an unpleasant experience, but just to see what level does this control our life. The Buddha said that if we understand, it's considered one of the nutriments of becoming, continued existence in a way, obviously for clear physical reasons, but also emotional, mental craving. But if one understands the nutriment of food, then one understands the whole nature of sensual craving, because it's such a strong aspect of many of our lives, and well into the monastic life too. It's one of the few sensual pleasures that the monastics are allowed. So moderation, it doesn't mean not eating or starving oneself or only eating horrible tasting food. It just means moderation and watching the influence that it has in our lives, taking that on as a training. Another Apanaka Dhamma is moderation in sleep as well, because that can easily become particularly if it's a particularly important one to keep in mind as we're developing our meditation practice, and possibly even those who like to go on longer retreats, to really see how we use sleep as an escape sometimes. And do we really need to sleep as much as we think we do? And it's sometimes good to challenge those assumptions. We don't want to take it to the extent of never sleeping because we think that's what all the high-level meditation masters are doing, but to challenge our assumptions and see how a devotion to wakefulness can actually increase our energy. So not getting complacent about just checking out when we get a little bit tired. The third Apanaka Dhamma is a broad category of sense restraint. So all the different kinds of influences and stimulations that come to us through our six sense bases, the five physical senses, and then the intellect itself, and the way that we allow the mind to flow out through these sense doors, and the amount of distraction and energy that is lost, even if we're not acting on, through body or speech, acting on the external world's stimulations, how the energy flows out through the sense bases and into the world through desire, aversion, and ignorance. And to see, and sense restraint often is interpreted as like closing the sense doors so that you don't experience the world of sights and sounds, and so that you're not moved by them. It's not an isolation tank, but more learning to see how it is the desire or aversion, particularly attached to certain features of the visual field, of the hearing environment, the sounds, how the mind moves in a certain direction to just justify the attraction or the aversion. So that sense restraint is not closing our senses, but it's learning how to attend wisely to the world around us, and not moving into the exaggeration of sensory experience, but seeing things clearly for what they are in all of their aspects. So seeing the unattractiveness in some things that we might traditionally only see as beautiful, or seeing the beautiful in some things, or the naturalness or the elementary nature of things that we would normally consider unattractive. So challenging our assumptions of how we engage in the sense world. Is this really the truth, or is this my mind making it some way that I want it to be? So this is what's meant by sense restraint. We can really refine that almost infinitely in our world, because we're so moved by these forces of desire, aversion, and confusion, and how they manifest in relation to the six sense bases. Lots of ways to recognize and dispel the complacency that we get in that, develop a sense of alertness and clarity in our relationship with the sense world. And then I could spend a lot more time even talking about the further aspects of the gradual path, and how not to develop complacency in our meditation practice, our the development of mindfulness, working with it, on reinforcing it on a daily basis. One good way of constantly honing it is just to maintain a sense of body awareness in everything we do, as best we can. A whole sense of, very simple, just this body moving through space, this body's postures, this sitting, standing, walking, lying down, in a very simple, non-complicated way. A lot of these practices are ways of simplifying our attention, bringing our attention back in to the bodily experience, knowing with right effort when our mind is moving in unskillful directions, and taking that repetitive conscious intention into as many aspects of our life as we can, not just settling for it when it's on the cushion or when we're on meditation retreat, and then letting it kind of all fall apart when we come back into daily life. So making the practice the life, this is what this core of our life is. It's not like coming from a retreat and figuring out how to establish our retreat experience into a daily practice, but more like how do we just make our practice the center of our lives, and then let the daily life, the practice of living in the world, conform to and adhere to the most important thing in our lives, which is commitment to this long-term development of the spiritual life. And it takes that level of interest and commitment, and we can do it. And if we do it, all of us here have that capacity to really take this on as a full training if you want to see the full benefit. That's the potential that each and every one of us has in this room. And we just need to review and reorganize sometimes as the practice goes on to keep it fresh, keep the initial inspiration fresh. So I think I'll stop there for now and offer that for this evening's reflection. And if people have questions or would like to reflect on anything they've heard or have other questions, then this would be a time to do that.
Andamayam Dhammakatayu Sadhu Karandadamase Sadhu Sadhu